You're not the kind of person who plays well with others. Vivin. That's exactly what he said right before grabbing the termination letter, already printed and signed 3 minutes. That's how long my very first meeting with the new CEO lasted, just enough time for him to completely misread everything that mattered. But that wasn't even his biggest mistake. The real error was thinking I didn't already know about what he'd done in Frankfurt. It was 10:35 a.m. on a Monday, just 3 days since he took over the board, called him a strategic disruptor. I called him what he really was, a man in a hurry to clean house and carve out his own legacy. I'd seen this type before. Different suits, same ego stench. He stood up as I came in. Barely. No handshake. Just a nod. "Vivian," he said. "Let's not waste time." I sat opposite him. The red folder balanced on my lap. I stayed silent. He spoke first. 8 years, he said. That's a long time to do the same thing. Process reviews, compliance, oversight necessary, yes, but not where we're headed. His voice was polished, like a rehearsed speech. I'm restructuring the leadership pipeline. I need people who can think quickly and move even faster. I've heard you're good at your job, but you're not the right fit for where we're going. There it was. Not a single question about my work, the insights I'd shared, or the risks I flagged last quarter. Not a word about the system I helped rebuild after the 2018 crisis. None of it mattered. He reached for a paper on his desk, already signed. I'm terminating your position, effective immediately. HR will contact you. You'll be treated fairly, I assure you. 3 minutes. That was all it took to erase me. I didn't flinch or argue. I just reached into my bag, pulled out the red folder, and placed it gently on his desk. He didn't touch it. "I won't need that," he said. I looked him straight in the eye. His fingers trembled slightly as he adjusted his cufflink. Confident, but not calm, I stood, smoothed my skirt, and headed for the door. I didn't mention that the folder's contents, detailed discrepancies, suspicious vendor accounts, and a flagged international transfer, had already been sent. One copy to corporate legal, another to the firm's biggest client, and one to a journalist I used to meet for coffee every Friday 5 years ago. No raised voice, no scene, but Harold McCullen had just fired the one person who knew exactly what he was hiding, and the countdown had already begun. It all started with a blinking light. 3 days before Harold fired me, I was sitting in my office on the 3rd floor West Wing, tucked away from the executive chaos, when my monitor chimed with a new message. I glanced at the clock. 7:28 a.m. Too early for vendor spam, too late for internal updates. I clicked it open. The subject line was blank. The sender used her old company email, not a generic Gmail, but the Kestrel Finance domain that was shut down after she left that domain. I hadn't seen it in years. And the name, Jennifer Marino. Jen. My friend, the quiet one from risk assessment at Kestrel and Finch, the same company Harold had come from, and the one he left without a trace. But Jen had disappeared too, cut off all contact. The last I heard from her was 2 years ago, when she called me in tears after being pushed out during a department restructure. We promised to keep in touch, but she vanished. No LinkedIn updates, no holiday greetings, nothing. So why now? I opened the message. One line. No greeting, no signature, no attachments. Just 7 words. Don't let him do it again. I stared at the screen, unsure if I'd imagined it. I refreshed. It was still there. But the timestamp was odd. 6:03 a.m. Nearly 90 minutes before it reached my inbox, I tried replying. "Jen, is this really you? What's going on?" The message bounced back. "User not found." I checked the server logs. No record of the email in the company-wide activity list. It was like it bypassed every filter. My fingers hovered over my phone. I still had her number saved. Though I hadn't called in years, I dialed. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." Of course, by 8:15, I was in the break room, coffee untouched, replaying every word from our last call. There's something wrong with the numbers, Viv. They're moving money. It's not just creative accounting anymore. She'd been talking about a partner project Harold personally led, offshore accounts labeled as regional grants. She never had proof, but she was scared. Said she saw him sign something that didn't match client statements. And now, out of nowhere, a ghost message from her account warned me, don't let him do it again. The word echoed in my mind as I pulled up Harold's polished public profile, transformational executive who turned around failing units, known for strategic streamlining and all the buzzwords. No mention of his quiet exit from Kestrel. No explanation for why their Q3 report disappeared from the investor site that year. But I remembered. They delayed publishing Q3 until after he left, blaming auditing issues. I'd shrugged it off then. Just a blip company's reshuffle all the time. But now, with a name, a warning, and a gut that wouldn't settle, I dug deeper. I grabbed an old thumb drive from my drawer, one I kept with Jen's training modules, just out of habit. Plugged it in 4 folders. 3 empty one named Archive Riskfinch. That one still held files. I opened it. Dozens of PDFs, internal review templates, vendor blacklists, memos. One file caught my eye, client transfer variance 2JM. I clicked through page after page of numbers, transfers marked legitimate but routing to inactive accounts, project manager names that didn't match system logs. Harold's name wasn't on any document, but his initials signed off on the last sheet. By lunchtime, my anxiety shifted into something else. Purpose. If he was starting it again, I needed proof, not just a gut feeling. I had to catch it before it took hold. But mostly, I had to understand. Why now? Why send that message, if it was even really from Jen after all this time? I stared at the words again. Don't let him do it again. It wasn't just a warning. It was a desperate plea. I hadn't spoken to Jen in nearly 2 years, not since she vanished from the financial world like smoke through a vent. No goodbye, no farewell post, not even a new job title on LinkedIn. She simply disappeared. But when I saw that message, those 7 words from her old domain warning me about Harold, something inside me cracked open and stayed open. So I called her. Her number was still saved in my phone, buried under J. Marino Kestrel. I held my breath as it rang. Once, twice, then click, hello. It was her voice. Older, rougher, like someone who'd been living underground. I hesitated. Jen, it's Vivian. Silence. Then a deep breath. I wondered how long it would take before hearing from her. Was that you? I asked quietly, referring to the email. Another pause followed, this time longer. Yes, she finally said. I closed my eyes and gripped the edge of my desk tightly. He's here, Harold. He's our new CEO. I know, Jen replied flatly, though I could detect bitterness just beneath the surface, the kind that time doesn't erase but only deepens. 2 minutes later, we switched to encrypted chat. I didn't ask how she knew to be ready for this. Jen was always 3 steps ahead, even back when we were just analysts drowning in spreadsheets and cold coffee amid the compliance chaos I typed. He's doing it again. Setting up shadow client accounts, same pattern. I even found a flagged project that doesn't exist. Of course, she replied. He never got caught before, just redirected. They swept everything under NDAs. I hesitated, then asked, did you ever keep any of it? The cursor blinked briefly, then came her message. You really want to see it? Yes, I typed 15 minutes later. A file landed on my encrypted drive, named KF_client, _4B_variance, June2019.pdf. I opened it slowly, feeling my palms grow cold on the keyboard. At first glance, it looked like a simple vendor contract. But then the inconsistencies caught my eye, small, subtle, but glaring if you knew what to look for. The client was Linen Group, authorized contact was TBD, and the funding source was listed as Region 4 discretionary grant allocation, which didn't even exist at Kestrel. Scrolling to the bottom, Jen messaged. I signed under authorized by. The signature was smooth black ink. H.M. Cullen, title VP Strategic Deployment. It was real, and it was rotten. You kept this all these years? I asked. I shouldn't have, she admitted. They made me sign an exit package banning me from keeping any files, but I knew someday he'd try again, and I knew no one would believe me without proof. I sat there, the weight of that scan pressing down on me. It wasn't just a smoking gun, it was a full blueprint for fraud. But why now? I asked, why risk contacting me? Because he's gotten bolder, she said. He didn't learn anything, just learned how to hide better, and because, well, I owe you. It hit me then. Back in 2017, I had vouched for Jen during an internal audit when one of her flagged reports caused turmoil. The board nearly fired her, but I defended her data, insisted she had integrity, accuracy, and insight. She never forgot that, be careful, Viv, she warned. He's not stupid. He doesn't clean up his own mess. He just makes sure someone else takes the fall. I leaned back, the contract still glowing on my screen. I've already been fired. I typed a pause. Then she replied, then you've got nothing left to lose. She was right. That scan wasn't just a record. It was leverage. I made 3 copies. One locked away in a secure backup, one sent to a trusted legal contact, and one slipped into the red folder, the very same one I'd carry into Harold's office 2 days later, where he wouldn't read a single word. But someone else soon would opening the quarterly ledger. A strange twist curled in my chest. It wasn't fear, it was colder. Like finding fingerprints on your bedroom mirror that you didn't leave. But these fingerprints weren't on glass. They were in the numbers. That morning, I requested temporary access to internal payment records, claiming I needed to prepare transition notes. I knew my credentials would be cut off soon after the termination meeting. So I had a narrow window. I didn't know what I'd find. I just followed instinct. Buried in the expense reports were transfers filed under vague categories. Client development, consulting bundles, special projects. But it wasn't the labels that alarmed me. It was the pattern, the exact same sum, $240,000, appeared every 14 days across different departments, routed through what looked like a dormant account. Running a deeper query over the last 6 months, I found 12 payments, all approved within 24 hours, all tied to an internal code listed as active, but with no name, no project lead, no correspondence trail, just a short reference tag, LGR 4B827. My hands hovered over the keyboard. That code alone meant nothing, but the client alias, Lyndon R., snapped me back. It was the same name Jen had found in the forged contract, only spelled slightly differently, not Linen Group, but Linen R., just enough to dodge duplication alerts in the system. It wasn't just suspicious. It was intentional searching the client directory. There was no listing for Linen R., no contacts, no engagement history. The system claimed the project was active, but it didn't exist over $8 million in approved payments. I leaned back, my spine stiffening. This wasn't a mistake. It was a design checking vendor records. I looked for any signed scope of work, service agreements, or contracts tied to that code. Nothing, no forms. No contact logs, no billing correspondence, just a digital trail of authorization stamps. And one stood out. User identity. Harold McCullen, admin. A chill ran down my arms. He hadn't even bothered to hide it. Every transfer was approved under his name. As if daring someone to notice or betting no one would care, I took a deep breath. Then another. Then I did what I was trained to do. Documented screenshots, exported logs, printed a copy of the ledger entries showing the repetitive transfers. I uploaded a password-protected version to my personal cloud under a harmless title. I saved a second copy on a flash drive buried under unrelated folders and printed a clean, annotated report that one went into the red folder. The room was quiet except for the low hum of ventilation and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. Outside my office, silence reigned. No chatter, no footsteps, just the sterile hum of a company pretending everything was fine. But everything was far from fine. I grabbed a sticky note and scrawled 5 words in block letters. Lyndon R. 8 million ghost. It was my anchor, proof of what I knew, and a reminder of what had to come next. This wasn't paranoia, it was precision. The red folder wasn't just a precaution. It was a fuse. I walked into the compliance briefing room clutching that red folder tightly, but no one looked up. 5 people sat at the table. 4 longtime colleagues and 1 newcomer, a senior director Harold had brought in from his previous firm. They sipped coffee, shuffled printouts, murmured over each other. Not a single one paused when I entered. I'd never felt like a ghost before. But in that moment, I did. I cleared my throat. Silence. I have something I need to bring forward, I said evenly. There was a suspicious pattern in the recent disbursements that didn't match up with internal controls. One woman blinked. Another kept scrolling through her tablet without looking up. Then Brian Carson, the executive director of strategic operations, crossed his arms and leaned back. I don't understand why you're here, Vivian, he said, his tone neutral but firm. As of this week, your department is being restructured. Any compliance issues should now go through the new channels. I kept my gaze fixed on him. This isn't about procedure. This is about possible misappropriation of funds tied to a client that doesn't exist. Brian raised an eyebrow. So you're accusing fraud? I'm raising concerns, I replied calmly. He drummed his fingers slowly on the table. Vivian, with all due respect, your access will be formally revoked by the end of the day. I suggest you leave this to the new leadership. Silence filled the room. No one spoke. Not even Rachel, whom I had mentored for years. I glanced down at the red folder in my hand, still closed. The evidence was undeniable. $8 million in ghost transfers. The exact scheme Harold had used at his previous firm. But they refused to acknowledge it. Not now. Maybe never. I hadn't realized how tightly I was clutching the folder until my fingernails bit into my palm. I understand, I said. Brian nodded. Cool, polite, final. I turned and walked out. The hallway seemed longer than I remembered, or maybe my legs just moved slower. Passing the executive conference room, something caught my eye through the glass wall. Harold was inside, standing near the head of the table, chatting with 2 other suited men. They laughed, relaxed. A laptop sat open in front of him, with a stack of folders beside it. I almost kept walking. Until I saw my name. The folder on top had a tab labeled Vivian Cross Personnel File. I stopped. One of the men glanced my way. Harold didn't turn, but I saw him tap his finger against the folder's label, like it was a game piece. I didn't flinch, didn't blink. They were studying me, dissecting my record, crafting a narrative, probably before I'd even finished writing my own. I walked back to my office in silence. No one stopped me. No one asked if I was okay. The red folder felt heavier now, like it sensed it was being hunted too. Sitting at my desk, I stared at the wall and listened. Somewhere down the hall, a printer hummed to life. A door clicked shut. The world kept moving, pretending nothing had changed, but everything had. This wasn't a warning anymore. It was a message. They didn't need to prove me wrong. They just wanted to isolate me, silence me before I could finish speaking. And Harold wasn't just brushing me aside. He was preparing to erase me completely. But what he didn't know was this. I had already shared the folder. I'd already handed over the story. And I was done waiting for permission. The day the tickets were refunded, I didn't cry. I just stared at the email confirmation, then closed my laptop and sat quietly, pretending that silence meant I'd made the right call. It was supposed to be our first real vacation in over 3 years. Just me and Ava 4 nights in Charleston, a beachside rental, no calls, no reports, no midnight emails demanding numbers that should have come weeks before Ava had circled the dates in pink on the fridge calendar. She even packed her suitcase a week early, stuffing it with sundresses and the book I'd given her for her 16th birthday. But the quarterly report arrived 2 days late, and the numbers were a mess. The finance team sent incomplete data, and the CFO was overseas. The only one left to untangle the mess was me. So I stayed, and Ava understood too well. She didn't yell or complain. She just erased the pink circle from the calendar that night without a word, then went upstairs. I heard her door close. Softly. Slowly. That was worse than a slammed door. I worked 26 hours across 3 days. No overtime pay, no credit, no acknowledgement. I fixed the report, reconciled vendor codes, flagged 2 suspicious expenses, and submitted everything to the board liaison 48 hours before the deadline. No one said thank you. Now, a week later, sitting at my desk after the meeting with Brian, after seeing Harold with my personnel file and realizing I'd been shut out of every decision I once led, I reached for my phone to text Ava. My hand hovered over the screen. What could I even say? I did the right thing. I'm proud of my loyalty. It was all lies now. Years spent building a reputation on precision, ethics, and commitment meant nothing. When the floor shifted, when Harold rearranged everything like chess pieces, I realized I wasn't a player. I was a piece, and I'd already been moved that afternoon. Staring blankly at my monitor, a message popped into my inbox. No subject, no sender name, just an audio file labeled "Play Me." I hesitated. My heart was heavy from the day, but I clicked. A grainy, distant voice came through. It was Harold. She's been here forever, knows where every file's buried. But come on, she's not leadership material. She's old furniture. You don't argue with furniture, you just replace it eventually. Laughter followed at least 2 other men in the room, confident, familiar voices. My fingers froze. Old furniture. That's what I was to him. An object, not a person. Something to walk around, sit on, ignore. I paused the recording and sat still, feeling something quietly break inside my chest. Not rage, not tears, something colder and heavier, lodged deep in my ribs. Who sent this? Someone inside, someone who wanted me to know I was being mocked. Or warned I checked the metadata, scrubbed no timestamp, no file path, just the voice, just the truth. I opened my drawer and pulled out a photograph. Ava, at age 10, holding a sand dollar from our last real trip together. Her smile was wide, sun-kissed, genuine. Back then, I believed hard work would protect us both, that integrity and dedication could build something lasting. But now, I understood the rules had changed. It wasn't about who worked hardest or knew most. It was about who controlled the story. And Harold had already started rewriting mine. I looked down at the red folder, at the spreadsheet logs, the flagged names, the fake accounts and approval trails I'd built this quietly. But silence hadn't saved me. I'd missed a vacation. 100 little moments I'd given up more than I realized. But I wasn't about to give up my voice. Not for a man who saw me as furniture, not for a system that rewarded men like him, not for a company that turned away and stayed silent. I clicked forward and sent the audio file to 3 people. 1 copy went to legal, another to a client contact, and the third to an anonymous tip line I trusted still operated. I left the subject line blank. I didn't need words. The recording would say everything for me. The receptionist barely glanced up as she waved me inside. "Harold's ready for you." I walked down the long, carpeted corridor with the red folder tucked under my arm, though it hardly mattered now. I already felt it. That strange, weightless ache in my chest. Like walking into a room where the ending was already written, and all I could do was play my part. Harold sat at the far end of the conference table, a glass of water to one side, his laptop to the other. He didn't rise when I entered, didn't smile instead. He motioned toward the chair opposite him, as if I were just another meeting to check off before lunch. I sat and waited. No greetings. No inquiries about how I was or mention of the years I'd dedicated. Late nights, crisis meetings, rescuing accounts nobody else wanted to touch. He simply opened a folder, skimmed the top page, and spoke with the flat tone of a legal disclaimer closing a commercial. "Vivian, after thorough review of our organizational structure and upcoming strategic priorities," he began, "we've concluded that your position no longer aligns with the company's future direction." I blinked. Was that all? No comments on performance, no feedback, not even a nod to the restructuring Brian had cited earlier. Harold continued, voice flat. "This decision does not reflect your work to date, but rather an evolution of leadership needs effective immediately. Your role is dissolved. HR will provide exit paperwork. Severance will be paid according to company policy." I tried to speak, open my mouth for some clarity, protest, even grace. But nothing came out. My throat felt shut, not from panic, but humiliation. He hadn't even looked at me 3 minutes. That was all it took to erase 8 years. He didn't ask what I knew, didn't care about the red folder resting unopened on the corner of his desk. I might as well have never existed. I looked down at my hands folded in my lap and realized they weren't shaking. I wasn't angry. Not yet, frozen somewhere between disbelief and despair, trapped in the space where dignity feels impossible to reclaim. Forcing myself to meet his eyes, I whispered, "Why now?" He sighed. "You're not a fit for this era, Vivian." There it was. Not a fit, not modern enough, not flexible, not bold, not loud, too precise, too careful. Too much of a reminder of how this company used to operate before spin and shortcuts became the norm. I swallowed hard. Then Harold did something strange. He reached for his open laptop and closed the lid with one hand. For a brief moment, just before the screen went dark, I caught sight of a document, an open spreadsheet titled in bold, "Client Funds Transfer Schedule." My blood ran cold. That file didn't belong here. It shouldn't have been visible on his screen during a termination meeting for the one person who might understand its meaning. He hadn't noticed I saw it. Didn't care. He'd gotten sloppy, or maybe he assumed I was too defeated to notice. That was his mistake. Slowly I stood, pressing my palms to the table for support. Harold was already looking down at his phone, done with the meeting before I'd even left the room. No handshake, no farewell, just silence. I didn't reach for the red folder. I didn't beg him to read it. It wasn't for him anymore. It was for those who'd have to clean up after him, and they were already watching. I turned and left, the echo of his words trailing behind me like smoke. "You're not a fit for this era." Maybe not, but I knew where the bodies were buried, and I'd just seen the shovel in his hands. The article dropped at 6:45 a.m. I was pouring coffee, still in my robe, when the headline burst across my phone like a flare in the night sky. "Unnamed source flags client laundering in Fortune 500 firm." No company named, no executives mentioned, but I didn't need that. I'd already written the story without touching a keyboard. Someone else had taken the baton. I tapped the link and scrolled. The site was a niche compliance blog. Mostly insiders, investigators, auditors, whistleblowers, not mainstream, but respected a platform that didn't publish smoke without fire. The post was brief, just 4 paragraphs. detailing internal documents hinting at false client entries, misdirected funds, and asset discrepancies. It mentioned anonymous submissions, a sudden pattern of irregular transactions, and a whistleblower refusing to be silenced. The last line hit like a pinprick to the spine. This could indicate financial manipulation involving upwards of $8 million over 6 months originating within the executive tier. I stared at the screen, half expecting the words to vanish, but they stayed. I sat down, the mug in my hand forgotten. Someone had taken the audio or the folder, or maybe the pattern I'd flagged had caught more than one eye either way. It was out there, no longer buried in private drives or tangled in red tape. It was alive, and that meant one thing. I wasn't alone anymore. The tension didn't fade. If anything, it sharpened. I knew how corporate damage control worked. Harold's team was already dialing legal, drafting statements, prepping rebuttals they'd dismiss it as hearsay. A disgruntled former employee. A misunderstanding their first move. Undermine the source, which meant I had to stay silent. For now, but that didn't mean I had to stay still by 10:15 a.m. Internal Slack channels were buzzing. The compliance chat was unusually active. People were asking vague, curious questions. Someone posted the blog link. It was removed 5 minutes later. Too late. The damage was done. Refreshing the blog's comments, dozens of posts appeared, mostly anonymous speculation. But one stood out. It wasn't public. It arrived in my private company inbox from an unknown address, no subject, no introduction, just one line. I believe you, I've seen it too. My breath caught. It was signed only with an initial, L. The sender's address was masked, sent through a proxy relay, but the timing matched perfectly with the Slack activity. Whoever they were, they worked here. And they knew I typed slowly. Can you share what you've seen? No immediate reply, but that message had already shifted something inside me. Hope doesn't need a chorus to survive. Sometimes all it takes is one quiet voice in the dark. I rose from my desk and walked to the window, looking out over the parking lot of the office that no longer welcomed me. The sun had broken through a patch of gray clouds, casting everything in that pale golden light that never seems to last. It wasn't relief that struck me then, but clarity. This wasn't over, not even close. The red folder was only the beginning. The ripple had started and was spreading fast. By the time I poured my second cup of coffee that morning, the second client had called requesting an internal audit. By lunchtime, a third had joined. These weren't minor players. These were top-tier accounts. Clients we'd spent years courting, contracts painstakingly secured by entire teams, relationships nurtured with dinners, retreats, and half a dozen signed NDAs. Now, they demanded answers. Each inquiry came wrapped in legal language, carefully neutral, but beneath the surface biting with suspicion. They weren't asking for numbers. They wanted the truth. The article had cracked the surface, but the clients drove the stake through the heart of the matter. One contract demanded clarification on payments tied to a project labeled Linen Regional. Another questioned recurring marketing development charges, repeated biweekly. The third didn't even ask. They froze all pending payments and requested a forensic review of our shared accounts. I knew what that meant. They were preparing to walk away. And Harold! He was nowhere to be seen at 11:40. I got a message from an old colleague still inside. You didn't hear this from me, but PR is in full meltdown. Legal's been pulled from 2 calls to draft holding statements, and they're rechecking every contract signed in the last 6 months. It's chaos. I almost laughed, not out of joy, but relief. The pressure that had built for weeks, months, even years, was no longer mine alone to carry. It was public, messy, irreversible, and the fire kept spreading. By early afternoon, another story broke in the press. This one named names. Former Kestrel and Finch executive under renewed scrutiny. Patterns echo past financial misconduct. There it was. Harold's past. The scandal everyone pretended didn't exist was clawing to the surface. The media was connecting dots, mentioning falsified vendor accounts, ghost clients, manipulated internal approvals. They didn't have all the proof yet, but the outline was clear, and Harold's name was firmly attached. I watched it all unfold from the quiet of my home, the same kitchen where I once canceled a vacation to fix someone else's spreadsheet. But this time, this wasn't my mess to clean. At 3:05 that afternoon, a call came from a blocked number I didn't answer. They called again. Still no answer. The third time, they left a voicemail. I waited, listened, then sat down. The message was brief. Just one sentence, spoken by a calm, confident male voice. "He should have never underestimated you." I didn't recognize the voice, but the tone was familiar. It wasn't a warning. It was an acknowledgement. Later that evening, I received another message. This time from a woman at a rival firm. Someone I'd met once at a conference. She said little, just sent a photo, a desk, a man in a navy suit, and in the center, a red folder. My red folder, same labels, same annotations. It was sitting on the CEO's desk at Orion Strategies, our biggest competitor, the same man Harold had publicly humiliated during a bid 3 years prior. I stared at the photo, breath caught between shock and a strange sense of satisfaction. He had it. All of it. And now Harold's downfall wasn't just internal, it was competitive. The storm had begun as a whisper, a leak, a quiet act of defiance. Now it was an avalanche. Clients were leaving, contracts collapsing, and the man who thought he could rewrite the rules was being buried beneath the facts he hoped no one would notice. I closed my laptop slowly, letting the image of that red folder on the rival CEO's desk sink in. He'd fired me to erase me, but he hadn't realized I was just getting started. The message arrived at 7:20 the next morning. Simple, no greeting, no subject, just an invitation. Private meeting, 11 o'clock, West Boardroom. Discretion advised. It was signed by Graham Thorne, senior board member, former CFO, and one of Harold's staunchest defenders, a man known for measured speech, firm handshakes, and never raising his voice. Deliberate, exacting, the kind who made most executives nervous. I wasn't most executives anymore. I wasn't nervous. I was calculating. At 10:57, I stood outside the boardroom door, red folder pressed to my side, my fingers tracing its edge like armor. I didn't know what to expect. An interrogation, a test, a warning. But I was ready. I opened the door. Graham sat at the head of the long table, a tablet before him, reading glasses perched low on his nose. "Vivian," he said without looking up, "please sit." I sat. He swiped once on the tablet and set it aside, then simply studied me. "You've caused quite a stir." "I didn't create the storm," I replied. "I just stopped pretending it wasn't coming." His eyes never blinked, but I caught a flicker. Respect? Calculation? "You understand what's at stake," he said, "better than anyone else here." He leaned forward. "The board isn't interested in rumors or blog posts. We want proof, facts, and above all, risk." I opened the folder and slid a sheet across the table. A single transfer authorization approved under a discretionary client program dated 3 months earlier. The amount, $480,000. The recipient, a shell account tied to a now frozen project. And the signature at the bottom, Graham Thorne. He didn't touch the page, but I saw his jaw clench. "I assume," he said carefully, "there's more where that came from." "There is," I replied. "Some of it's already in the hands of people who don't work here." His gaze sharpened. I let the words hang, not as a threat, but as reality. "I'm not here to negotiate," I said. "I'm here to clarify what happens next." He raised an eyebrow. You think you're in a position to do that? I think I'm the only one in this building who truly understands how deep this goes and how cleanly it can be handled if the board is willing to stop pretending Harold is salvageable. Graham didn't answer right away. He leaned back, steepled his fingers. The public hasn't named him yet, he said slowly, but they will. He nodded. And you? What about you? You're no longer with the company. Why keep pushing, technically? I held his gaze because I spent 8 years cleaning up everyone else's disasters, and this time I refuse to let anyone bury me beneath theirs. He reclined slightly, thoughtful rather than defensive. Suppose we take you at your word. Suppose it all goes to a vote, I leaned in. Then you'll have to choose what matters more, shielding a man who deceived you or safeguarding the company you've built your reputation on. A heavy silence settled. Then he spoke again. One condition. He said. I waited. You keep this private. Not now. Let us have a chance to clean things internally. I waited briefly, then nodded. Only if you purge everything I rose to leave. But just before the door, Graham added, You're not who you used to be. No, I answered, glancing back. I finally see the game you all have been playing. He nodded slowly, almost approvingly. Good, you'll need that. The air felt different outside the boardroom, sharper somehow. The once cold, silent hallway had shifted because for the first time in weeks, I wasn't reacting. I was in control. And that red folder was no longer a warning. It was leverage in motion. 2 days after that meeting, an email arrived. This time, it carried a subject. Advisory proposal. Immediate attention requested. I hesitated before opening. Not because it surprised me, but because I already knew its contents. It lingered 11 minutes in my inbox before I clicked. The message was formal, refined, deliberately free of apology from a board liaison I hadn't heard from in years, offering me an advisory role to assist ongoing internal probes wrapped in flattery, institutional respect, urgent tone, and trust. They wanted me back, not as staff, not as a threat, but as a symbol, a patch over the breach Harold had caused. I read it twice, then a third time, ensuring I caught what was left unsaid. No mention of my departure, no nod to the red folder, no acknowledgement of how they'd let me vanish quietly. Fine, I wasn't here for apologies. We arranged a virtual meeting. The screen loaded to reveal 4 faces, 3 board members and a neutral legal observer. Polite nods, measured smiles, moves as calculated as a chess match slowed down. Vivian, Graham Thorne began. We appreciate your integrity and your silence these last days. I nodded once I wasn't silent. I was careful. A pause. The legal representative gave a tight smile. We believe your insights could help restore trust with clients, staff, partners, and the press. I added, no denials? They wanted me as the cleanup crew. Maybe once I would have agreed, not now. Calmly, I said, I have conditions. 4 pairs of eyes shifted. First, I continued, appoint an independent audit firm reporting directly to the board, not the CEO or interim managers. Understood, Graham responded. Second, I added, publish all results openly, no redactions, no buried footnotes. The legal rep straightened. That risks legal exposure. Transparency is always risky, I replied. So is concealing corruption. Silence. Anything else? One more thing, I said. I won't take the role. The screen froze. I've already begun building a new advisory group, focused solely on ethical oversight in finance. Independent, nimble, uncompromising. Graham folded his hands. That makes you a competitor. No, I said. It makes me a safeguard. They said nothing. They couldn't argue I wasn't asking permission anymore. I wasn't stepping back into the system I exposed. I was building something immune to being fired, silenced, or sidelined. "We'll still need your help managing public messaging," one board member said. I nodded. "Send questions to my office. We'll respond accordingly." It was the purest power reversal I'd ever witnessed. I'd once sat before this panel defending numbers, processes, and ethics no one understood. Now they needed me because they didn't know how to rebuild without me. After the call, I leaned back, staring out the window. No celebration. No satisfaction. Just clarity. I hadn't won, but I had control. And sometimes that's enough to change everything. My new office's view wasn't impressive. No skyscrapers, no glass towers, just a quiet, tree-lined street. The steady hum of a city moving on, perfect. I sipped hot, strong coffee while scrolling through morning news on my tablet. The headline took up half the screen. Harold McCullen banned from corporate leadership indefinitely. Below it, an old photo. Harold mid-stride, dodging reporters as a mic hovered near his jaw. The article detailed investigations, client fallout, board's swift action, and ethics violations barring him from any executive role in public companies again. No mention of me, and exactly how I wanted it. The fallout moved faster than anyone expected. After the rival firm leaked the red folder's contents, clients turned statements into ultimatums. The board had no choice but to act within a week. Harold was suspended within 2, terminated and officially disqualified. The notoriously slow-to-act finance world had made an example of him. Some called it justice. I called it overdue. My new role wasn't just a job. It was a choice. I launched the Integrity Advisory Group, a small, independent firm focused on proactive ethics oversight in finance. No boards silencing us. No layers of approval diluting truth. Just clear work and clean lines. We were small, only 6. But each member had a reason for being here. None had forgotten what it felt like to be silenced for profit. I didn't want corner offices or fancy titles anymore. I had something better. Control. At 9:22 that morning, my assistant knocked softly, handing me a small envelope with no return address and my name neatly written in blue ink. Inside, a folded thank you card, handwritten, ink slightly smudged like it was rushed. It read, "You don't know me, but I watched everything. I never spoke up. I wish I had. My daughter is 13, and after all that happened, she said, I want to be like her someday. Thank you." I didn't recognize the handwriting, and I didn't need to. Some things don't require signatures. I closed the card, cradling it gently in both hands, and sat quietly for a long moment. It wasn't pride that stirred within me, nor was it revenge. It was release, the quiet kind that arrives when a burden lifts, not because the world suddenly made sense, but because you finally decide not to bear what was never yours to carry. Harold had paid for the empire he built on deception, but the real victory wasn't his downfall. The true strength was knowing I didn't have to become like him to see him fall. I rose and moved to the window, cracking it open just enough for a soft breeze to slip inside. Outside, someone was helping a little girl adjust her backpack. She beamed and pointed toward a nearby office. The adult, maybe her father, smiled and nodded. I smiled back, not because they recognized me, but because I recognized who I had become, and I liked her very much.